So my friends, if you were to travel to Boston in the early part of the 19th century and bumped into a guy named John Murray Spears, which you would do, you would find him to be an active abolitionist, one of the organizers of the Underground Railroad in Boston, part of the Vigilance Committee that helped hide and move fugitive slaves from the South to places of safety. You'd likely find John Murray Spears giving a public lecture about feminism. He advocated for full legal equality for women in the 1830s. He advocated for legal birth control and even open marriages at the time. He was an interesting and radical revolutionary figure of justice and peace and equality. Then if you left Boston for 20 years and came back to find John Murray Spears again, where you would find him is in the backyard of somebody's house in Lynn, Massachusetts, with a small group of followers building a God machine. John Murray Spears was part of what was called the spiritualist movement at that time. If any of you have seen old film or television where somebody's got a crystal ball and there's something floating over a table and people are communicating with dead loved ones or relatives, that's the caricature of spiritualism. John Murray Spears had been visited, he said, by a group of people that were called the electrolyzers. They included Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, speaking to him from the grave, giving him instructions on how to build what we would now call a artificial intelligence or a supercomputer. He and these other spiritualists believed that not only could you communicate with the souls of dead people, but that you could tap into the energy of soul with a capital S that worked like electricity or sunlight. You could tap into it and harness it. He was getting instructions from his messages from the band of electrolyzers. And a small group of his followers were gathered in a backyard in a place with a large tower in Lynn, Massachusetts, putting together zinc and copper and moving parts for what they believed was something called the new motor, an electronic messiah that once they turned it on, would harness the power of soul itself, bringing in an era of peace, prosperity, love, and justice for all time. A utopia that happened when you flipped on the switch. So they gathered everybody together and put it all on a dining room table and built its parts to make it look like a person of sorts. And he and a woman that they called the New Mary ritualistically gave birth to the machine outside in Lynn, Massachusetts. Their neighbors noticed and wanted them out of town. Well, nothing happened. The machine didn't work the way they planned, and they packed up disappointed and moved out of state to try their experiment again. They blamed a group of Baptists, but nobody knows who it was for sure, for destroying their machine overnight and dismantling the parts and taking it away. He got a message from them again saying it was time to leave the ministry. And so he did. But his goal, he thought, was that you could mechanize salvation. You could build a machine so powerful that it would tap in to soul itself. You could flip the switch, and when it was over, everybody would be healed and whole and saved, and an era of utopian peace and prosperity and love would reign over the earth for all time. Hallelujah. When we talk about soul in this church, which is what you asked us to talk about in our summer where you got to propose and vote on topics, it was a departure from the first 6 weeks of the year in which most of the questions had to deal with division and anger and how we're supposed to deal with those people right now. This question, what do you people mean when you say soul? Seems to me to come out of a place that is equal parts skepticism and genuine desire to explore if there is something lasting and real that lives at the very core of who we are. I know many of you are deep skeptics, and we're glad that you're here because it keeps us honest. But what I believe that you think sometimes we mean when we say soul is something like Dr. Frankenstein or John Murray Spears cooking up a batch of religion in a backyard that looks like a caricature, something that is almost unbelievable to a modern Western mind. I hope you know that's not what we're talking about. Not a ghost in the machine, not some caricature of someone with angel wings that floats up right after you die. I think there are many of us, because I know I've talked to you, who equally do wonder what happens to me when I'm gone. Does something of me linger on in the atoms of my body? Do I fall down like rain, like we heard in the song? Is something identifiably me lingering after death? Or is there something unique and precious about me worthy of calling a soul? I don't know, is the official answer of our religious tradition. Most of all because I, and anyone who claims to be a leader in this religion, hasn't been dead before, at least that we know of. And so we can't speak with any accuracy or integrity to what happens after you die. So if you're looking for an answer to that question, it is here. I don't know. What I do know, what feels very real to me, is that in all my interactions with people, all of you raised your hand earlier at least once and said you were people, there's something in us that we can access that feels like it is most true about us. The part of you that feels most reliable, most trustworthy, most loving, most kind, the part of you that wants to be loved, and the part of you that gives love. When somebody says, I love you, you probably hope that they don't just mean the accumulation of neurons or atoms that look like you. Doesn't seem that romantic. When someone says, I love you to me, I think they're speaking to some core part of who I am that I hope was me 20 years ago and will still linger 20 years from now, or 40 or 60. What feels most real to me is that whether immortal or not, there's something in us that is precious, that feels like you, that feels like the real me, and that is worthy of being protected and defended and nurtured and grown or gotten back if we've lost it. Today, we're not talking about your eternal soul, but how do you access and find and protect and build and nurture and save, yes, save, the part of you that feels most valuable and worthy? The question isn't really, do you have a soul, but can yours be sold? And I think the answer for all of us is in part, yeah. That part of me that feels most real and valuable, most trustworthy, has been compromised so many times. I think when we talk about selling our soul, often we get this image of some Faustian deal with the devil where you're compromising your eternal salvation to be rich and famous, or you're the blues musician Robert Johnson standing at the crossroads selling your soul to the devil to play the guitar really well. In my experience, when my soul has been sold, it's not happened in one moment. It's been chipped away at bit by bit by bit by daily experiences where I look up in the mirror and say, who is that? And it's happened mostly in three ways: contact with evil, consumption mentality, and conformity to my tribes. By contact with evil, I don't mean a one-time obvious thing. And for some of us, there's a moment of trauma so intense, or we participate in an immoral act that we have what psychologists call, especially with PTSD or soldiers, often moral injury. Where something happens to you or you do something to someone else that makes you feel like the core of who you are has been compromised and you've got to find it again. My experience, it hasn't been a one-time thing. It's been minute by minute by minute. My contact with evil has been like the philosopher Hannah Arendt described, the banality of evil. She said, when evil comes to steal your soul, it doesn't tell you that it's evil. The SS officer shows up in a nice, cleanly pressed suit and calls you sir or ma'am. And the trains run on time and everything looks fine, except there's evil and dehumanization happening over and over. It's when patriotism turns into nationalism. Or when we don't stand up for them because it's not happening in my backyard. Or when I see horrific images on television of terrible things happening in the name of my country to people who cannot stand up for themselves, but I've got a movie to go to. It happens when my convenience outweighs the justice of the world. And I'm not asking for moral purity here. Liberals do a really good job of pretending like there's some ideological purity that everybody has to live up to, and it's impossible. I don't mean that you have to buy the organic, locally sourced kale chips that you drove your Prius to go buy in order to be a good human. What I mean is the idea of whether or not you're doing the self-reflection to see if whether the person that's looking back at you in the mirror is who you think it is. Whether things are being done in your name that are taking away the very soul of who we are as a nation or a person. If when you feel in your gut that's not who we are, if you're doing something about it. That's the way that contact with evil compromises the very soul of who we can be. Consumption is another way. It is the tried and true Western lie that you are what you own or what you can own. You can be a unique individual just by buying all the things we've sold to millions of other people. And you should work harder and at longer hours at jobs you don't like, working for people you don't like, so that you can buy things you don't need and go into debt. And just do that faster until you die. That's who you are. Who the television or the newspaper or the billboard says you are. And I think you know that's a lie, but boy, I fall into that so much. The other that has compromised my soul, and I'm guessing yours too sometimes, is conformity to my tribes so much that my desire to belong, my desire to be authentic start fighting one another. And this doesn't just happen in other places. One of the things I loved about Ralph Waldo Emerson's self-reliance was a portion of his essay in which he said, I know what the minister's going to say before he says it, no matter what the text is, just based on the denomination that they're preaching from. And they can say they're not going to toe the party line, but they know where the boundaries are, and I can guarantee they'll stay within it. He called us clergy hired attorneys. And he's right for the most part. Even here. Because we know that even in liberal environments, there are orthodoxies, they just often go unspoken. In progressive Unitarian Universalist communities, they're more often political than theological. And so sometimes even in our own tribes, especially in our own tribes, we start to feel that we want to say something or think something or do something, but if we did and poked our head up just a little too high, the people we love and belong to would say, you're not really one of us. Michael Eric Dyson said that when progressives form a firing squad, they do it in a semicircle. So that didn't resonate at all. The question is, when the world and the television and the newspaper and the news on TV and the preacher and your family tell you who you are, because they will, do you believe them? Do you have the capacity for reflection to stop and listen to a part of you that is deeper than all of that noise and act from that? When we talk about soul here, we mean the essence of who you are. How can we save that? It doesn't happen like turning on a light switch. You don't pray the right way one time or give enough in a contribution or join the right club and suddenly everything's taken care of. I was baptized Southern Baptist. And one thing I really loved about the Baptist church was their assertion that nobody was irredeemable. Nobody. We used to say every saint had a past and every sinner has a future. But one place where I would part ways with them today is the idea that you just have to do the salvation ritual one time. It's not like John Murray Spears and his God machine, where you mechanize salvation and you get to get the right process and elements together, and then you flip on the switch and I don't have to worry about being good anymore. Thank you very much. I'm all done. I wish, because it takes practice to build a soul that you can be proud of. That's what church is the gymnasium for building a soul you can be proud of. In the Walt Whitman reading that Sally read to us this morning, he's voicing some of the practices. He says, take these leaves out every year, meaning do it over and over and over again. Question everything you've been told in school, in church, everything you've heard from a book or a preacher. Over and over and over again. And my favorite line, dismiss what insults your soul. But you have to know what insults your soul to hold on to it or dismiss it. So if we want to save or nurture or get back that part of us that feels most real, I think it happens in two kind of seemingly contradictory methods. One of the first ways that we hold on to and save our soul is in deep, silent self-awareness of who we truly are. It's that daily practice of doing nothing but sitting in stillness for 20 to 30 minutes, and if you're having a hard day, try even longer. Until the noise of the world goes away, and the waters are stilled, and underneath you can say, oh, that's who I am. You might not always like what you find when you do that. I know that I don't. But it helps clarity. It helps to shut out the noise of letting other people or institutions or tribes tell you who you are without your permission. The other way that we engage in saving our soul, apart from solitude, is meaningful relationships. That's church. That's good relationships with family and relationships of accountability. It's where you step up and say, how am I doing? I have this idea. Does it resonate with you? Can you tell me how I'm interacting with the part of you that would be called soul? It's hard work, but mutual accountability helps keep us honest. I hope you know that in this church, when we talk about saving souls, which we do mean, we just don't mean forever. Your eternal soul, because our universalist ancestors would tell us, that's already taken care of. Don't worry about it. We're all going to the same place. We just don't know what it is yet. And it'll be fine. What's at stake is whether or not you are living a life that feels uniquely yours while you still have a chance. Are you living a life that's being told to you, enforced on you, sold to you, or is it yours? And how would you know? In the love letter that Richard Feynman wrote to his dead wife, you could tell that even for this atheist, uber-rationalist, quantum physicist, something so real was left of his love that it was worthy of writing a love letter to her when she was gone. Whitman said that if you practice the kind of awareness and relationship he was talking about, your very flesh would become a great poem. That's the task. To practice the kind of radical self-awareness that would say, I know who I am, and I will give it to the world. The kind of radical relationship that will say, I will do no offense or harm to the part of you that is most real and loving and genuine and kind. I will do no violence to the soul of another, not in my name and no more. What's at stake is building the kind of life that long after you're dead, people will write love letters to. Building the kind of life that when you are dying, when you die, we can look back and say, my very flesh was a great poem. That's when you'll know your soul has been saved. May it be so, and amen.